It was a great movie, but
Yeah.
it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
Millions of people watched The Passion of the Christ. They saw the brutality. They felt the weight of it. But when Mel Gibson sat down with Joe Rogan and started breaking down what he actually hid inside this film, Rogan's face changed completely.
You're making this film, and the idea was that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice was for all mankind.
Because Gibson did not just shoot a movie about the crucifixion. He buried layers of meaning into nearly every frame: theological codes, ancient scriptural callbacks, and visual symbols that most audiences walked right past without ever realizing what they were looking at. And that is not even the most shocking part. What Gibson told Rogan next about what happened behind the cameras during filming, events the cast and crew still cannot rationally explain decades later, left Rogan visibly stunned. Supernatural occurrences, unexplained healings, an atheist actor who walked off said a completely different man. And once you hear what everyone missed in this film, you will never be able to watch it the same way again. What everyone missed most. People saw a brutal depiction of the crucifixion. What they did not see is what Gibson encoded into almost every visual choice he made. Take the opening scene, the Garden of Gethsemane, darkness everywhere. Jesus kneeling in prayer while his closest companions fall asleep, unable to stay awake for even 1 hour during his moment of greatest need. Then Satan appears, slithering through the shadows. A serpent emerges from the darkness, and Jesus crushes it beneath his heel. Here is the catch. That single image is doing something most viewers completely miss. It is a direct callback to Genesis chapter 3, the very first promise of redemption given to humanity after the fall, and simultaneously a foreshadowing of Revelation, the final defeat of evil. Gibson compressed thousands of years of theology into one visual moment, one foot, one serpent, the entire biblical narrative in one frame, and he did it again and again throughout the film. During the scourging scene, as the Roman soldiers tear into Christ's flesh, Gibson cuts to a single drop of blood hitting the stone floor. Most viewers see brutality. What Gibson actually filmed was a visual echo of the Passover lamb, the blood sacrifice that protected the Israelites in Egypt. The entire sequence is constructed not just as torture, but as ritual. The soldiers are unknowingly fulfilling a pattern set in motion centuries before they were born. Gibson told Rogan that he wanted audiences to feel the violence, but he also wanted the theologically aware viewer to recognize what the violence meant. Two films are playing simultaneously, one on the surface for everyone, one beneath it for those who know where to look. Here is another one most people miss entirely. When Jesus falls carrying the cross, Mary rushes toward him. Gibson cuts to a flashback of Jesus as a child stumbling, and Mary running to catch him. It is a mother's instinct repeating across time, the same hands that picked him up as a boy now reaching. For a man, she cannot save. That scene is not in any gospel. Gibson invented it, and it devastates anyone who has ever been a parent, because it translates cosmic theology into the most human emotion possible. A mother watching her child suffer and being powerless to stop it. But that is not the only hidden layer. Gibson insisted on filming entirely in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew, languages dead to everyday conversation for centuries. Most people assume this was an artistic choice for authenticity. Gibson told Rogan the real reason. He wanted to strip away the protective familiarity of English. He wanted viewers to stop hearing words they had memorized since childhood and actually see what was happening, as if encountering it for the first time. The subtitles were not a limitation. They were the weapon. And get this, Gibson spent years pulling from ancient theological sources beyond the four Gospels, weaving in details about the cosmic warfare happening behind every visible moment of suffering, the demonic children tormenting Judas after his betrayal, the androgynous, unsettling depiction of Satan holding a grotesque infant, a deliberate inversion of the Madonna and child, the flashback to Jesus as a carpenter building a tall table, Mary's confusion, and Jesus joking that it would catch on. These scenes have no direct biblical basis. Gibson designed them as visual theology, using cinematic language to communicate spiritual truths that literal depiction could never reach. Every shadow is deliberate. Every frame carries meaning, and most audiences walked right past it. If this is already changing how you see this film, subscribe now, because what happened behind the cameras is even harder to explain. The door that slammed shut. When Gibson brought this project to Hollywood, he expected a fight. He did not expect to be erased. This is the part nobody talks about. Gibson had just directed Braveheart. He had an Oscar. He was one of the biggest names in the industry. And when he walked into studio meetings with this project, executives who had returned his calls for 20 years suddenly could not find his number. One meeting captures the entire dynamic. Gibson sat across from studio heads, pitched a film about the final 12 hours of Christ's life, and watched their faces close like shutters. No discussion of budget, no creative notes, just silence. Then a polite suggestion that perhaps this was not the right time. But here's the deal. It was never about timing. Gibson told Rogan he recognized a pattern. Christianity was the one faith tradition Hollywood felt comfortable dismissing. Projects with Christian themes were labeled old-fashioned, out of touch, unmarketable. The assumption was always that nobody wanted this, that religious sincerity was something to be embarrassed about, rather than explored with any artistic integrity. Colleagues who had stood beside him at awards ceremonies started keeping their distance. Phone calls went unanswered. The machinery of Hollywood turned against him completely, and the cruelty was not always subtle. Gibson later described how people he considered friends suddenly had scheduling conflicts every time he called. Industry insiders leaked negative stories to the press before a single frame had been shot. The narrative was being built before the cameras even rolled. This film was dangerous. This filmmaker had lost his mind. Walk away now before it takes you down with him. But Gibson would not walk away. He could not. His Catholic faith was not a hobby or a brand. It was the foundation of his life. And this story, The Final Hours of Christ, was the one he believed he had been put on this earth to tell. So, he did something almost unheard of. He put $30 million of his own money on the line. Every dollar. No studio safety net. No committee approving every decision. He assembled a crew of believers, flew them to Italy, and started shooting a film that the entire industry told him would end his career. Think about that for a second. $30 million of personal money. In an industry where even billionaires use other people's cash to hedge risk, Gibson bet everything on a subtitle film in dead languages about a story Hollywood explicitly told him nobody wanted to see. That is not ambition. That is conviction at a level most people will never understand. The events no one can explain. Now pay attention to this, because what happened on that set moves into territory that sounds impossible. But these are first-hand accounts from people who were there, and decades later, none of them have changed their stories. It started with Jim Caviezel's body. The cross he carried weighed over 150 pounds. Real weight. Real wood. During one take, it dislocated his shoulder completely. Caviezel's face in that scene is not acting. That is a man in genuine agony, captured on camera, used in the final cut. He later described the sensation as feeling his arm, separate from his body while the cameras kept rolling. Then came the scourging sequence. The whips were designed to look brutal on camera, but twice they connected with Caviezel's actual body. The first strike knocked the wind out of his lungs. He doubled over, gasping. The second left his back bleeding and raw. The crew watched it happen in horror. Nobody called cut fast enough. Caviezel did not ask to stop. He did not ask for medical attention. He kept going, take after take. By the end of production, he had developed hypothermia from filming nearly naked in freezing Italian conditions. He contracted a lung infection, then pneumonia. He lost significant weight. His body was pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance, and that authenticity bleeds through every frame of the finished film. You are not watching a performance. You are watching a man who genuinely suffered to bring this story to life, and the crew knew it. Every person on that set could see what this role was doing to him physically, and then the lightning started. Assistant director Jan Michelini was standing on set when the first bolt hit him. A direct strike. He survived. The crew was shaken but tried to rationalize it. Freak weather, bad luck. Then it happened again. A second direct lightning strike hit Michelini during the same production. The odds of being struck once in a lifetime are roughly 1 in 15,000. Twice during a single film shoot defies every statistical model. Michelini later described the experience as feeling chosen, though he could not say by what. But here is where it gets truly unsettling. During the crucifixion scene, Caviezel was hanging on the cross. arms extended, crew positioned around him, and lightning struck him directly. The man playing Jesus Christ, hanging in the crucifixion position, hit by a bolt from the sky. He walked away completely unharmed. The crew stared in silence. In biblical tradition, lightning represents divine power and judgment. It covered Mount Sinai when God delivered the Ten Commandments. It accompanies moments of divine intervention throughout both testaments. Nobody on that set could offer a rational explanation. Several crew members later said that moment changed the atmosphere of the entire production permanently. The jokes stopped. The casual conversations between takes went quiet. People stopped treating it as just a film. Something else was happening around them, something none of them had signed up for, and everyone could feel it. Now pay attention to what happened next, because this is the reveal that shook Rogan. Luca Lionello was cast as Judas Iscariot. He arrived on set as an avowed atheist. No belief in God, no interest in the supernatural. He took the role because it was a compelling part in an ambitious film, nothing more. Months later, when filming wrapped, Lionello had become a believer. He struggled to articulate what had changed, spending months inhabiting the psychology of betrayal, guilt, and the possibility of redemption had reached something he did not know existed inside himself. He told interviewers afterward that he could not explain it rationally. He simply knew he was not the same man who had arrived in Italy months earlier. Something on that set had broken through whatever wall he had built around himself. An atheist walked onto that set. A believer walked off, and he never went back. And the quiet miracles kept coming. Maya Morgenstern, the Romanian actress who played Mary, had a secret she kept from the entire production. She was pregnant. She carried a child within her while performing the role of a mother watching her son die. Life growing inside a story dominated by death. Resurrection woven into the very body of the woman portraying grief. Nobody knew until later. Then there were the healings. Gibson described to Rogan a young girl with severe epilepsy who had been present during filming. She had suffered seizures her entire life. After her time on set, she went an entire month without a single episode, not one seizure. It broke every medical expectation. Others reportedly experienced restored senses and physical improvements that doctors could not account for. Whether divine intervention, extraordinary coincidence, or something else entirely that none of them could name, the people who were there walked away convinced of one thing. They had not just made a movie. They had stepped into something. Something had touched them. Or they had touched something that was never supposed to be touched. The verdict the world delivered. When The Passion of the Christ hit theaters in February 2004, the reaction split the world open. Roger Ebert, arguably the most influential film critic of his generation, gave it a perfect 4 stars. He wrote that in decades of reviewing cinema, he had never truly understood the depth of Christ's suffering until Gibson's unflinching portrayal forced him to confront it. The violence was not gratuitous, Ebert argued. It communicated something that every sanitized version of this story had always failed to convey. Other respected critics compared Gibson's directorial vision to masters of spiritual cinema who had spent entire careers grappling with questions of faith and transcendence through film. This was not a vanity project. This was a filmmaker operating at the peak of his craft on the subject that mattered most to him. But not everyone agreed. Some critics called the violence excessive, arguing that the brutality overwhelmed the message. They questioned whether audiences needed to witness that level of suffering to understand the story's significance. The debate became one of the fiercest in modern film criticism, with both sides making passionate cases that revealed as much about their worldviews as about the film. Religious leaders raised serious concerns before release, worried that certain portrayals could reinforce historical stereotypes used to fuel anti-Semitism for centuries. These were not frivolous objections. The accusation of deicide, the claim that Jews were collectively responsible for Christ's death, had been used throughout European history to justify persecution, violence, and murder against Jewish communities. Any filmmaker approaching this material carried a responsibility far beyond entertainment. Gibson maintained his intent was to show collective human responsibility. Romans carried out the execution. Jewish leaders called for it. Disciples fled and denied knowing him. Every human being whose failings made the sacrifice necessary shares the weight. That was the theological point. But the conversation forced audiences to grapple with difficult questions about how sacred narratives can be told responsibly in a world still scarred by religious violence. The controversy only amplified public interest. People who would never normally watch a religious film felt compelled to see what the argument was about. The result crushed every prediction. Hollywood had made $700 million from a film no studio would touch, made by one man with his own money, in dead languages, with subtitles. It became one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in history. Churches organized mass viewings that turned into spiritual events. Viewers left theaters weeping. Atheists reconsidered their assumptions. Believers felt their faith renewed. The film did something that entertainment rarely does anymore. It mattered. It left a mark on the people who experienced it that did not fade when the lights came back on. What is coming next? But here is the deal. Gibson told Rogan he is not finished. He is only getting started. For years, he and screenwriter Randall Wallace have been building something that dwarfs The Passion, a film about the resurrection, not a conventional sequel that picks up where the crucifixion ended. Gibson described it as a cosmic exploration, spanning from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle. Eternal war between good and evil, with that singular moment, a dead man walking out of a sealed tomb, at the center of everything. Gibson told Rogan that the resurrection is the most challenging aspect of faith for most people, and he understands why. Someone executed by professional killers, confirmed dead by Roman soldiers who knew exactly how to verify a corpse, buried in a sealed tomb guarded by armed men, and then walking out 3 days later. It defies everything we understand about the natural order. Gibson admitted that, for much of his life, he accepted these claims because others believed them. Family, church, cultural tradition. But over time, he sought his own understanding. He studied the evidence. He wrestled with doubts, and he emerged with a conviction that was his own rather than inherited. That personal journey is now driving every creative decision behind this new film. And Gibson made one argument to Rogan that landed like a hammer. Every apostle except, possibly, John died a violent death rather than deny what they witnessed. Crucified, beheaded, flayed alive, stoned. They had every opportunity to recant, to save themselves. To admit the resurrection was a fabrication. None of them did. Gibson leaned forward and asked Rogan directly, who dies for something they know is a lie? People die for beliefs all the time. That is nothing new. But nobody willingly submits to torture and execution to protect a hoax they personally invented. Not one of them broke. Not one of them recanted. Rogan did not have an answer. And the silence in that moment said more than any rebuttal could have. The truth that will not stay buried. This is not a story about a movie. This is a story about what happens when one man risks everything to tell a truth that powerful forces want buried. Gibson bet his career, his reputation, and $30 million on a vision the entire system said would fail. Lightning struck people on his set. An atheist found faith. A girl stopped. He's seizing. 700 million people bought tickets to a film in dead languages that Hollywood refused to make. And here is what the entertainment industry still does not want to admit. Gibson proved them wrong in every way that matters. He proved that audiences are hungry for stories with genuine conviction, that people want art that asks difficult questions and refuses to provide easy answers, that the safe, sanitized, committee-approved content dominating mainstream entertainment is not actually what human beings are searching for. We want to be challenged. We want to be moved. We want stories that cost something to tell and demand something from us in return. Studios spend hundreds of millions of dollars on focus-grouped content engineered to offend no one and challenge nothing. They optimize for opening weekends and merchandise. Audiences consume it and forget it within days. But The Passion of the Christ, made outside the system by a filmmaker following his own vision, is still being talked about over 20 years later, still being debated, still changing lives. That is the difference between content and art. Content fills time. Art alters the people who encounter it. And now, Gibson is building something bigger, something the industry still does not want made. So, here's the question that should unsettle you. If the supernatural events on that set were just coincidence, why do the people who witnessed them still refuse to call them that? And if they were not coincidence, What exactly was paying attention to what Mel Gibson was creating? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this changed the way you see this film, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because when Gibson's Resurrection Project finally surfaces, you are going to want to be here for that conversation.